Can we have your attention just for a little while? Wait, where's Bill? He says, and then he abandons me. Billy? All right, I'm Billy. I know. I'm Billy. I know you are. All right. My name's Michael Thompson. I was one of David's two roommates in a Lowell house. Hillary, the other, and Hillary's going to speak in a moment, as is Sandy Fraser and Bill McClelland and Tim McClelland. Sometimes life opens up and gives you a second chance. David McClelland had an enormous impact on my life, far out of proportion to the years of our friendship or the years we actually spent together. And his loss was a huge hole in my life and a confusing one. And so when Bill, who I'm allowed to call Billy, because Davey always did, when Billy called me and said he had discovered this artwork, and I'm going to let Bill tell that story, it opened up a chain of events and meetings and lunches and conversations that have led to this moment. And we're here to celebrate the inspirations of David McClelland, his extraordinary work, and his genius, which no one doubted. But the thing that I think that gets us all into this room is that along with his artistic talent and his extraordinary command of so many things, was the fact that David was just an extraordinarily loving and generous-hearted person who always wanted to share his knowledge, wanted to bring everybody in, wanted his friends to meet his friends, and to be friends with each other. And I knew that was the reason that when Bill started to call people, and Tim and Bill and I started to think about whom we might invite to this event, we had the spirit of David at work with us. I personally have to say it's been a healing experience for me, because as I said, there was this loss of David and no service and just some pain and emptiness. I have gotten for 2 years to spend a lot of time with Davey's beloved younger brothers, who have a lot of the McClelland. And when I saw Tim's jewelry for the first time, he's an extraordinary jeweler, and saw his shared interest in the medievalism that David so loved. And when I talked to Bill, it's his humor, his quirkiness, and it has been for me a really personally restorative experience, as it is to see so many people who cared about David. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Bill. I have one announcement, which is they're throwing us out of here at 3. But Bill and because Signet has other events for graduating Signet members and their families immediately after this, we were lucky to get this piece of time. We have a little private room over at the Charn Harvard Brew House. If you feel like you haven't had all the conversation you need, we were tired to there. Anything else?
No, I think I'll mention something else too.
So thank you, Bill. It's yours.
Okay. Unlike Michael, I am not a practiced speaker, so I may be reading in combination and it'll look awkward and stupid. So it's not a problem. It's not a problem for me, so I hope it's not. But I want to thank everyone who was here today so much for coming. It is an amazing thing, and I just want to give, many of you know this, but I'll give you a little background on why we're here. Back in about August of 2008, one day I was Googling. I was on the internet, and as you know, the internet would sort of expand year to year. And every so often up till then, I would Google David C.K. McClelland. And I would occasionally find, because David did so much that our family didn't know about. We knew so much, we had a lot of material, but we didn't have, there were things he did, and I would see an entry for a magazine or for a cartoon that had been published. And it was nice. And then, but one day, this day in August 2008, I came upon an entry that referred to calligraphic manuscripts, American calligraphy, in the Houghton Library. And I clicked again, and I saw that they're describing these pieces, over 50 pieces, that had been donated to the Houghton Library by Philip Hofer. And I read more, and I'm seeing these things, and he said, text by Rumi, text by John Berryman, text by John Cage, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and original works, one that's in the room called Worship the Bird That Flies Without Wings. And I was, in a word, gobsmacked. I was absolutely, because neither I nor Tim nor anyone in any of our friends knew that these pieces ever existed. And I called up the Houghton and said, can I come see these? And they said, yes, you can. And so for the last 10.5 years, there's been a lot of activity. And the result of that activity are the works of this book that you see over here, which is what we have been doing. We've actually made 2 books, one of which you will all receive a copy of today, a smaller book, which has selections of David's work and several essays and memories of David by the shorter pieces many of you wrote, and a long piece by David Lagomarsino, who traveled with David the summer after their junior year in 1968 to the Welsh colony in Patagonia. They were Celtic majors, and they knew about this Welsh colony, and they wanted to study the language and the people who had migrated to this place, established this colony. And there's a long piece in that book about that. And in this book over here, which you've been looking at, is pretty much everything David did, his artwork, and collected most of the pieces at actual size. So it's a prototype book, and it's an incredible. Tim designed the cover and the back cover. Make sure you see both the front and the back, because it's an amazing book. It uses many of the papers. David loved paper, and this collected them. We have much of his original paper works, and those are used in the book. So now, basically what I'm just going to do now is I want to thank everybody, the individuals who are responsible. So this is going to be a little more kind of reading, but there's so many people. We have several essays, longer essays in the book, and those were Sandy Frazier, who is my lifelong friend, who has been such an important part of this whole project from the beginning. Is there Michael Thompson, who this project and everything has meant so much to as well. Peter Scott, who is here, who is with David at WRA, and a wonderful artist in his own right. Ted Widmer, who when I contacted him, immediately responded and knew David through the Lampoon, and has been an enormous help making connections with the Lampoon and other places. Melissa Wren, I don't know Melissa, I would point you out, but if you see her. So anyway, Melissa Wren worked with, she was on a panel with Sandy Frazier at the Morgan Library about honoring Saul Steinberg. And I met her after this event and introduced her to David's work, and she responded very well and has written an amazing essay about it, and we've been working together, and she has really been the person who is helping us to, we hope, bring David's work to a much wider audience. And David Lagomarsino, as I mentioned, who wrote this amazing long, beautiful piece about their trip to Patagonia. And I want to thank, of course, Hillary Worthen, who came out from Berkeley and is going to speak in a moment. One of David's oldest friends from WRA and his roommate at Harvard, and George Birnbaum, who had dinner with last night and was also one of David's closest friends. Nick Clark, who has helped us from the beginning.
Bill, you couldn't have done it with me.
I know, I realize that. It's true. Please excuse me, I'm going to try not to forget anybody. I want to thank the people from the Houghton Library who have come here today. It was amazing that they brought these original pieces. They don't let them out of the house very often. And with the armed guards and everything, they're all here. And but thank you to the Houghton, to Carrie McGinnis, Peter Ricardo, Mary Hagert, Leslie Morris, and James Capobianco, who are all here.
And Anne Marie is a. Well,
I'm sorry. Oh yes, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were coming. What is her name? Anne Marie.
Anne Marie.
Anne Marie.
is a.
Ben Levy of the 50th reunion, who helped us get the signet, and Mark Ruby, who is our host here today. Many thanks to them. Bob Neer and Nancy Acunis from the Lampoon, who were able to bring this amazing piece here, the Bayou Travesty, which was the legendary Lampoon cover. And make sure you see this. It's one of his great pieces. I want to thank all of you who are here who wrote your short remembrances for the book. The short pieces at the end of this book are really amazing. Mary Goethals, is Mary here? Mary's not here. Well, she's supposed to be here. So she may still come. Is Ellen Leopold here?
Yes. Ellen.
Oh, hi, Ellen. Great. Kit Holder, one of David's oldest friends from WRA. Mark Johnson, is Mark here? No, Mark didn't make it, but he wrote one. Patrick Ford, who was David's Celtic advisor and chairman of the Celtic department at Harvard, who is here. John Lewis, I don't think is here either. He was one of David's oldest friends. Unfortunately, some people they were coming, but they haven't appeared yet. Bob Eisenman, Mark Stumpf, and Mo Hannon. Did he make it?
Mo is not able to make it. His partner was ill today.
Okay.
He sends his best.
Okay, so then there are a number of others who aren't here who I knew weren't coming, who wrote pieces, and I just want to mention Jay Eastman was David's oldest friend from Michigan, from elementary school, and he is still in Michigan, and he wrote a piece and is a wonderful guy. Bob Schulman and Hugh Gagan from WRA. John Roberts, his English professor, been back in touch with. Catherine Walker and Annika Mayer, two of his close friends. Bruce Jackson, an amazing folklorist who David worked with. He's at the SUNY Buffalo, and he wanted to be here. And a special remembrance of a classmate from the class of '69, John Plotz, who wrote me several years ago and said that he had commissioned a piece from David for his roommate named Robert Shaw, and he said, you should get in touch with Robert. It's an amazing piece. It's from the Jubilate Agno by Christopher Smart, and it's one of the greatest things. And at the time we were living in South Hadley, we had a house in South Hadley, and I contacted, he was teaching at Mount Holyoke, and we borrowed it and we scanned it. It's this beautiful, amazing piece. And I'm very sorry to say that John passed away last year, and we were so pleased and happy that to have been in touch with him. And also Michael Frith, who was another Lampoon legend from the class of '63, and he's been so helpful and done so. He got me in touch with Ted Widmer, and he wanted to be here as well, but he's not well. And finally, I want to thank my wife, Jean McClelland, for the support and for everything she's done for this project. I've spent a lot of time on it the last few years, and she's been very, very generous. And Jean knew David and loved David. David, when we were first living together here in Cambridge, and David was in New York, and he had several bad stretches, and he would come back and stay with us. And Jean's caring for him and concern and loving of him was one of the greatest things I've ever seen, and I can never thank her enough for that. And it's once again, it's just so great that you could all be here, and it's a sad day, but it's also a joyful day. And with that, I will either Sandy Fraser would like to come up.
It's a beautiful project. Thank you.
Yeah, here.
It's like a sacred object behind it. The first thing that you learn when you go to Harvard, or one of the first disappointments that you have when you go to Harvard, is that you discover you're not a genius. And after you learn a little bit about things you never dreamed of in high school, and you learn about the culture of the world, you learn about history and art and music and poetry, and you get a glimpse of what human beings have done, you have the second disappointment, which is you realize you don't even know a genius. But for those of us here, we don't have that second disappointment, because we did know a genius. And it was a remarkable experience to see what actual genius looks like. We hear about genius all the time, and knowing exactly what to order in a restaurant is not genius. Genius is something very different. And what we learned from David was what it looked like. It was like a marvel. It was like when a whale surfaces next to your boat, you kind of go, look at that. It was like a marvel in the natural world. It was, as Michael pointed out, it was really a great stroke of luck that this particular genius, genius found a home in somebody who was so generous and kind, and someone who was so eager to share what he knew, and so eager to bring people in, as Michael has said. David didn't come from nowhere. He came from a milieu, and that milieu was his family and his more extended family in Michigan. And I'm from Ohio. I met David when I was in high school, and I don't want to diss Ohio, but
There's 7 Western Reserve people here.
okay. But as I've said about Ohio before, it was just boring enough. That is, you had to make up your own kind of world and culture to a certain extent. And an essential thing for every artist, for all artists, is you have to get your own attention. You have to think, okay, yeah, right, I'm paying attention to this. This is real. Well, David came from a milieu of his mother, who was a wonderful, endlessly curious, very learned and wonderful woman, and her mother, his grandmother, who was also kind of an artist of sort of no particular calling, but all callings, and who was a really cultured woman. And David's great uncle, Thomas Marker, who was a wonderful painter. And then his brothers, Bill and Tim, who were just inventive, and to go to their house in Rochester, Michigan, from Ohio, was to go into something. It was like, in later years, it would have been like going to see Prince, maybe. Just, wow, and go down the basement and all Timmy's stuff on the walls, and you're just, the beautiful paintings of their Uncle Tommy on the wall, and the amazing books in their record collection. And it was just an elevation of the mind, you know. It was so, and I thought of it as School of McClelland, or like the Hudson River School. This was like, and it was so helpful to my friend Don Erskine and me. We were both from Hudson, Ohio, and we would go up and visit, and it was just this wonderful revelation. What we see here, this great work that Bill and Tim and everybody else who participated put together, this is the School of McClelland, and it is continuing. And it gives me, I'm really, really happy to see that, and to know that Bill with his music, Tim with his jewelry, Jean with her music, Carrie with her jewelry that she works on, and then Tim and Carrie's daughters are going on into the arts, Emma and Sadie, and you see School of McClelland goes on, and it really is encouraging to me. I've actually kind of lost my final thought here, but I'm going to.
That never happens to me.
I'm just going to resurrect it. I was reading W.H. Auden's poem on the death of Yeats, and he describes how Yeats dies, and then he says he became his admirers. And the great thing David could do was to show you, take something out of a book. It was just some dry old book on your parents' shelves, and show you how that thing that's just in a book, what it's like in real life. Like, how does this really work? And what we're seeing right here, this is how it really works. He became his admirers. And now, in a way, I don't know, we are David, or David is definitely lives in us. And it is, it's a kind of a responsibility. But it's also just a wonderful blessing and a gift. So, again, I join everybody in thanking David for knowing us. Thanks.
You're up, Pillar.
Yeah, I'm Hillary Worthen. I met David when we were both sophomores at Western Reserve Academy in Ohio, and it's okay. I grew up in the same town as Sandy. So. In fact, I think you took courses with my dad.
I sure did.
So,
You got
And-
speak up. You got to speak a little louder.
a little louder? Okay, I'll try. Dave, just on your comments on Rochester, Michigan, David and I became very close friends immediately. I was drawn to him because he was the single funniest human being to this day that I've ever met. He could, at that age, at that tender age, he could declaim an entire paragraph in Donald Duck talk. Most of us get to the point of being able to say, but David could actually do a whole speech. I was smitten, and but he, as they said, he was also an incredibly kind person, and he invited me up to his house for I think the first Thanksgiving that he was there, and it was the first time I'd ever been on an airplane. So it was a very memorable visit. And I'm going to come back to another part of his family, which is your dad, who was also a very impressive person. And I think that in many ways this wonderful Bayou travesty here reflects a little bit of not only the concatenation of his cartooning and his humor and his reverence for art and for the arcane, but also a little tip of the hat to his dad, who was a sort of a semi-professional athlete and quite a football and track star. But I think, despite the fact that many of the beautiful works that you see out here have religious themes. I don't think David was a religious person. I knew him for 3 years at reserve. We roomed together for 4 years at Harvard, and I never actually knew him to have what you might call a religious sentiment. But he held at least 4 things really deeply sacred. And the first of those was people. For David to arrive at Harvard was a little bit like a kid in a candy store. There were so many interesting people here, and he was drawn to people like, kid to candy. And he would come back every day having met somebody new who was incredibly interesting, and he would tell me all about it. And it got to the point where Michael and I used to, when we got the new Boston phone book in our room, we used to write on it, David's many friends in. and then we would annotate that to some of David's many friends. Keeping up those relationships was very difficult. As you all know, he actually did stay connected with people very well, despite all the troubles that he was having. And that was because he was a deeply kind person. And that was the first thing the second thing that really drew me to him at WRA, because not everybody there at that age was very kind, as our fellow classmates can attest. I think the third thing that he held really sacred was the arcane. David had a way of searching out meaning and searching out beauty in places that other people didn't look very often. And this showed up in things like majoring in Celtic studies, which to me was a what? I know there are some people here who think that's like mainstream stuff, but he was so convincing about how fabulous it was that he got me to take Scottish Gaelic in my sophomore year. I was the only undergraduate. We read a 17th century transcription of an oral story of Deirdre of the Sorrows, and there was only one dictionary and no grammar in the entire university. So it was like this little swarm over the dictionary in the basement of Widener Library. It was a lesson in self-directed learning. I think the fourth thing that he held sacred was art, and I think the evidence of that is all over the place here. When there was something beautiful outside, he would take it and translate it into something beautiful that he could put on paper. And it was amazing to see him do things. But his art was always had, or often had, a kind of a twist to it. Now this is a great example here, because if you look at this very carefully, you'll see that there's a lot of pseudo-Latin on it. And right in the middle here is this one word that looks like the third person singular of a Latin verb that might be, say, fucio or fuciere. And for those of you who remember any Latin, the third person singular is fuck it, which David managed to get onto the cover of a magazine at Harvard, and nobody noticed it. So going back to humor for a second, I just mentioned a couple of things that I still tell my grandchildren about. And I think, Mimsy, you may have been present for one of these. David and Michael and I and a couple of young ladies, I think Mimsy, you may have been one, were sitting in the living room of our suite at Lowell House, and David emerged from the shower into the living room wrapped only in a towel. He danced out into the middle of the room, turned around, and whipped off the towel to reveal another towel underneath. And then he did another little dance, and he whipped off that towel, and there was another towel underneath. And by that time, he had accomplished his mission, rolling on the floor. And he retreated into his room and got dressed. And later he confided in me that underneath that towel, he actually had a pair of jockey shorts, in case of technical failure. But that willingness to either embarrass himself or humiliate himself or even lose a job was, I think, a hallmark of a great comic. I mean, if you think about the great comics, they all share that. And one of those examples was that he was rather taken with structural linguistics, and in particular Roman Jakobson, and then he got into structural anthropology and read a lot of Claude Lévi-Strauss, whose great book, The Raw and the Cooked, was the foundation of structural anthropology. So when he got a job decorating the new Proposition comedy club in Cambridge with graffiti, the first graffiti that he put up was Lévi-Strauss eats it cooked. Somehow that didn't really meet the requirements of the job, and he was fired. But it remains to me one of the great David McClelland moments. So I want to just touch for a second on the tragic side of things too, which we're all aware of. And for me, lying in bed at Pennypacker Hall freshman year and watching my closest friend spin into what I now recognize as a manic episode was completely confusing and terrifying. He spent the summer at McClelland, and after that there were periods of time when he would have manic episodes and periods of depression and so forth. You know, I've been a physician for my adult life, and knowing what I know now, I look back and I'm just devastated by the idea that nobody really got a grip on this situation with him. For example, what the hell was a kid with bipolar disorder doing, taking Dexedrine and staying up 2 nights in a row for exam period? You know, things like this that somebody, me or us or whatever, I just feel like we should have known somehow better how to help our friend. And it's been one of the tragedies of my life that we didn't. I was confused at the time. I think everybody, the cultural trope was that if you weren't crazy, you weren't paying attention. So it was sort of normal to be depressed or anxious or whatever. But it was not normal to have to struggle with what David struggled with. And despite that, he never lost his sense of humor. He never lost his deep respect and the way he held people to be sacred, and art, and searching for beauty in the weeds of Goodison, Michigan, and places like that. So I'll just close by saying that somewhere around sophomore, junior year, David stopped saying goodnight when he went to bed. And he started saying, Aguskia Daida. David, like Marcino, may know what that means, but my pronunciation is probably bad, but it means, it's Middle Welsh for to bed he went. So I've often said when I think of David, Aguskia Daida. And I'm very, very grateful to Bill and Tim and Michael and everybody else who helped to organize this, for this opportunity to reflect on my dear friend whose loss is really unimaginable. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tim McClelland. I'm Davey's youngest brother, and I want to just say that it's wonderful to have you here. And I was here, I came out, my parents allowed me to come out to Cambridge when Davey was putting up a show at Adam's house. And I was about 11. It was like November of 1968. And I got on an airplane and came out here, and Davey met me, and he had this big show that he was going to put up. And he had all his artwork, and he had all this stuff from the Lampoon, and he was busy. And he helped me to do it. He included me in that. And we dry mounted stuff and put it on the walls, and we hung the show. and we had this opening at Adam's house, and it was the best moment of my life. It was unbelievable. And all the people were very nice to me. I was extremely cute. And I was ready for it. I was all ready for it. And I had several drinks. And I had a riot. The best thing that had happened to me, easy up until that point in my life. And but it was interesting because we worked together. We worked almost all night. And what's been mentioned is that he was concentrating on this work, wanted it to come out well, but he was chatting with me and asking me about what I had been doing and all this kind of stuff. And it was really, it showed me how you can be an artist and you can have a life and you can enjoy yourself, and it's not all torture. And but it is a lot of work. And so this is 50 years later now, and we have another art show here in Davy's honor, and Billy and I decided to make this book that is everything that he did. And the reason we did it was because Davy died young enough so that he was not known. He was really unknown as an artist. He had done this work for the love of the artwork itself and for the kind of, I don't know, what the reasons that artists make artwork. And but he wasn't a brand, you know. He hadn't turned his attention to the career aspect. And so there's an obscurity that he's going to have because it was a short life and he didn't develop in a lot of ways the way some artists do and mature. He did not mature as an artist, but he had that fire that sometimes is almost better. And so the book has that in there. The book is there, and we're hoping to get that out in the world. It's kind of a flowering of the work that's in the Houghton Library and in the Lampoon and in various collections and private collections. So it's all in there, and we're happy and we like it. We're really happy to have this reception for that. And I'll just say that, you know, working with Michael, working with Sandy, working with Billy closely, and a number of people here were very much wounded by David's death. And these wounds do heal. They become closer as the, you know, it's a scar, and it's always going to, for me, it's always going to be a scar. But it is a lovely chance to get to know our friends so much better than I maybe would have otherwise. And the last thing I just want to say is that I've thought about that everybody here, to one degree or another, had quite an impression made on them by Dave. And I'm an artist. I'm a sculptural artist, jeweler, and impressions are what are not is not a mold. An impression is where you take something and push it into something else, and there's a certain part of it that has a negative area of that thing that's making the impression. So everybody here has some impression of David. There's no question about that. And if you take all those and arrange them correctly, then you have David. So I would like to propose, if it's not too odd, that Dave's here with us, with all our impressions gathered around him. And for that, I'm very grateful. So thanks for coming.
Can I just say one
Please,
thing?
please.
Only in that I am sadly one of the people that didn't know David. I don't know how I missed him because I sure love to laugh. But there are two things. At a sermon at Easter, it was talked about loss, and the minister said, the last thing that you lose in memory is the person's voice. So I hope all of you that knew David can go back into your interior and get whatever wonderful voice that was. But I'd also like to say something, a thanks to Philip Hofer, because of the way that he supported David, and then happily the way that a man of impeccable judgment left that body of work to the Houghton Library, where it will be preserved ad infinitum. And you can't ask for better stewardship than that. And that's a pretty good check in the plus column in terms of building a reputation. So I think we should also thank Philip Hofer.
I work in independent schools, and I know how important this is to them. Can we get the All of Western Reserve people up here for a photo? I'm quite serious, yes. It's perhaps regrettable, but absolutely inevitable.
What the hell are you going to do with this?
No.
With Tim, with
What? All right, and Tim. Western Reserve and Tim. Okay, yeah, no, it has to be. That's what I'm told. All right. Of course I will. All right.
Maybe can I just, before we all disperse, just a couple of things. Remember, there is an event, an after event, right across the street at John Harvard's, which you are all welcome. Just say you're here for the private event. And there's a room, we have a nice room. And perhaps if those who might like to speak, who are not, say some things there, that would be a chance. Also, there is a small book which every family will get a copy of. And so make sure you get, we're going to kind of pass them out in a couple of minutes, so make sure you get one.
Don't leave without
the
book.
So I think that's it.
I think we did it bureaucratically. All right.
I tried.
All right. We got to do it.
Yeah, just the class.
Sing the Western Reserve song. That doesn't bring a smile to your face. Thank you, gentlemen.